If you are a somewhat serious Dhamma practitioner, there is one question that usually arises at some point in your practice. Should I ordain? Should I become a monk? Surely the Buddha praised the homeless life, like few other things in the Suttas, and it would make sense, right? After all, the home life is dusty and crowded, while the homeless life, as a monk or nun, is wide and open. Today we try to answer the question if you should indeed ordain, or if practice at home is a good enough option for you. But first, we need a few words on the historical background in the Suttas to understand the idea of a wandering or homeless ascetic in general. And this is kind of important. The culture at the time of the Buddha was radically different from today, at least in most parts of the world. There was a rich culture of asceticism already established in large parts of northern India, where the Buddha spent the majority of his time. Wandering ascetics and philosophers of any kind were roaming the streets and teaching their ideas to whoever was willing to listen. Or in short, this was a high time for a homeless lifestyle without any fixed, point where you were spending most of your time. Today, things are slightly different in most parts of the world. There are monks. They are no longer really homeless, but live rather stationary in a monastery. And those are usually scattered all over the world from various schools and traditions. It is not rare that monks have just exchanged one home for another, while mainly the interior decoration and the wardrobe has changed. Back in the days, it was rather easy to, go forth, as suitable circumstances existed everywhere. Today, that is, at least in most parts of the world, no longer the case. In fact, good places are kind of hard to come by for the majority of people, or at least if you want to practice like the venerable monks and arahants of the past, which, at least from my point of view, should more or less be the goal. In short, 2,600 years ago was the high times of Buddhism, and since then the Dhamma might have stayed alive, but the culture around it has become a bit muddled. Back then, many people would go forth to the noble Sangha to see what they have seen and understand what they have understood. The Buddha even praised especially young people who would go forth in the prime of their lives, those who did not wait until they got older and sensuality was harder to come by. At some point, the Buddha even had to create a rule about parental permission, because his own people complained that too few children were staying at home to continue their clans. One could rightly say that the Dhamma was rather popular back then, but even that popularity accounted for a little more than a fraction of the entire population. Even back then, the Buddha frequently said how few advanced practitioners and people they were. There might have been a culture around merit and giving to the poor, but for the most part, that was all people were interested in, like it is today, in sensuality. The Buddha even openly said that it is hard for his generation to understand dependent origination, as they were so much more interested in sensuality and clinging and delighting in those things. He even contemplated not teaching, because he very well knew that it would be troublesome and disagreeable, as I explained in another video, an arahant can still have disagreeable thoughts. Short sutta snippet. Just as bhikkhus in this, I cannot pronounce that, Jumbo-Deepa, delightful parks, groves, landscapes, lotus ponds are few, while more numerous are the hills and slopes, rivers that are hard to cross, places with stumps and thorns, and rugged mountains. So too, those beings are few who are born on dry ground. More numerous are those beings who are born in water. Those beings are few who are reborn among the human beings, and those beings are few who are reborn in the middle of the province, and those beings are few who are wise, intelligent, astute, and able to understand the meaning of the Dhamma. Those beings are few who are endowed with a noble eye of wisdom. Those beings are few who get to see the Tathagata. Those beings are few who get to hear the Dhamma and discipline expounded by the Tathagata. Those beings are few who have heard the Dhamma, retain it in mind. And those beings are few who examine the meaning of the teaching that has been retained in mind. Those beings are few who understand the meaning and the Dhamma and then practice in accordance with the Dhamma. And those beings are few who acquire a sense of urgency about things inspiring urgency. Those beings are few who then inspired with a sense of urgency strive carefully. Those beings are few who gain concentration, one-pointedness of mind based on release. Those beings are few who obtain the exquisite taste of delicious food. Those beings are few who obtain the taste of meaning, the taste of Dhamma, the taste of liberation. And this is a collection of suttas from the Anguttara Nikaya, number 1.333 to 377, I believe. And as you can see, the higher the attainment gets, the rarer it gets. Very, very few people, even at the time of the Buddha, were born in the right places, in the middle provinces, given with the right mindset, blessed with enough intelligence to understand the teaching, etc. And the higher you get, the rarer any attainment gets. So it is truly a fortunate thing that we still have the good Dhamma around and are in a situation where we can actually understand it. And we should make much of that. Yet even at the time of the Buddha, there were still many people who chose to stay at home. The typical statement of, "Let Master Gotama consider myself a lay follower for life," can very much be interpreted as someone who has attained the right view, but stayed at home. Something radically shifted about their perspective. They have understood that what has been overthrown has been turned back right again. You now have another frame of reference, so to speak. Yet they still stayed at home. Why would it otherwise be worth mentioning if it was not related to the Dhamma? In fact, the very statement implies that someone has seen the Dhamma for himself and was deeply impressed by it. In fact, there were likely even more lay followers than monastics back then who had attained the right view, simply because there were many, many more lay followers. There's also something to say about the kinds of lay followers, as they can be quite different in nature. Some of them chose to give their wives away and basically abandon all their wealth. In many cases, they have dedicated quite a bit of their fortunes to help maintain the noble Sangha of the Buddha. Yet others chose to live at home with their wife and their kids, even up to the point of anagami. That was possible, and the suttas do talk about that. There was much talk of highly attained lay followers in white robes, which is usually considered a mark of a very advanced lay practitioner. Some say that it is the mark of an anagami as a layperson. So with all of this in mind, what is the difference between ordaining and not ordaining? After all, and I said this many times before, the training that everyone strives towards Nibbana must go through is identical. No matter if you officially wield the title of a monastic or not, you still have to throw away all your attachments. This can be compared to people trying to get good at sports like weightlifting. Most of the very good people are indeed professional athletes who get paid for what they do, but they are also Olympic-level athletes who are technically amateurs. Clarence Kennedy is a very good example. He immediately comes to mind. And to be honest, why shouldn't there be such people? The training is the same. You have to lift heavy weights and adhere to a very strict diet and low-stress lifestyle, etc. And you could even use the same example to convey yet another point. Just like stream entry seems freakishly difficult and hard to attain for most people, so it does seem difficult to squat 140 kilograms of weight. Most people think of that as so unattainable that it is not even worth trying. Yet those who are intimidated, but train themselves nonetheless, will soon find out that it's not so difficult after all. The more they train, the more they demystify their past beliefs, and sooner or later they will reach their goals. Just like the Buddha said, too, in the simile of the hen and the eggs. Stream entry might seem hard, but it is only, impossible if you think it is. No professional label is required to get to stream entry, just the work. You have to lift those weights, so to speak, or unburden yourself, throw away all the attachment. In that sense, lifting weight and practicing the Dhamma is a bit different. But given that it is possible, are the circumstances still better as a monastic today than the lay life? That's a serious question. Well, that would depend, as always. What are good circumstances even? We could list a few like non-crowdedness, few people, alone time, few temptations, closeness to nature, health, enough of everything, and a few other things, or, the absence of a few other things. As you might imagine, nearly all of those things are easier to get or easier to avoid as a monk in the gathering of like-minded people. Without any question, the optimal monastic lifestyle is superior to the lay life in terms of practice quality. There should not be any question around that unless you misunderstand the Dhamma practice as some form of cushion-based stuff. But few things in life are perfect. So how do more realistic modern monastics compare? From all the information that I could gather, the answer would be usually bad. Most monasteries are quite crowded places with many duties, many people, and they are often corrupt in many places. Many of them no longer teach the true Dhamma. It is not rare that seniority matters more than anything else. And in the past, it was about your level of wisdom and serenity in the majority of places, and that is no longer the case. at least if you go by the statements of the esteemed monks like Ajahn Chah, who called most of the places in his religion bad or corrupted. The Dhamma is on life support, so to speak, in his country. Yet there are good places still. It is just that they are usually full or hard to get to concerning visas and everything else. If you are lucky or diligent enough, you might be able to make it to one of such places and will indeed have a very good condition for practice. But from what I can tell, there's only a handful of places around the globe that would allow you to practice the Suttas style, or the, as I recently learned, it's called early Buddhist text. I never knew that. And most people are full of rituals. Most places are full of rituals and crowds, full of duties and even sensuality. It's just a different kind of sensuality. Your robes and everything else matters to you, then you are still, well, adhering or clinging to sensuality. And that is not a good environment for practice. And the people living there have just exchanged one sensuality for another sensuality. Given all of that, a lay setting might sometimes offer good enough circumstances for much progress to be made. You don't need optimal circumstances, especially not when you have to search for an eternity for them. You need just that, good enough circumstances for progress. And you can always reassess later if you have to become a monk to finish the job, at least in my opinion. You can waste an enormous amount of time just searching for a good place, just to discover that they do not take new members. In yet other cases, ordaining is simply not possible, so keep that in mind. There are people who are more or less forced to stay lay people and continue practicing like that. If you have certain illnesses, if you are too old, if you don't have parental permission, or even worse, if you have been defeated before, then becoming a monastic is no longer an option. And by the way, this list is likely not exhaustive. In short, there are technical reasons that simply prohibit you from ordaining, yet you can still make progress. But luckily, the true going forth happens on the level of the mind, and is not about moving your body to a temple or moving the body through, I don't know, a forest or something. It is about throwing away your attachments, relinquishing craving, inducing dispassion. The real going forth is about leaving behind the world on the mental level. People usually went forth upon understanding and attaining the Dhamma or the right view in the Suttas. It might be more than a valid option to practice until then and decide later if you still want to be a monk. That is a point where you have correctly measured the task and at least know what you get yourself into. It is much better than becoming one of the possibly 99% of monastics who just lay down their robes sooner or later. So in summary, both are good options nowadays. There is nothing magical about monkhood. It is just that it makes things a bit easier given the right and good conditions. If you find a good place, then by all means, consider going forth. It offers group accountability, and you kind of agree to confess your desires before you commit any offense, which puts tremendous pressure on you. Otherwise, you are defeated and can never join the Sangha again. If you still decide to lay down the robes to indulge, you may do that, but there will be quite some shame involved in coming back. There was even a case in the Suttas where a monk did that 7 times before finally becoming an arahant. And just to give you a short snippet from the Suttas, from Anguttara Nikaya number 5.76. Lust invades his mind. With his mind invaded by lust, he burns bodily and mentally with the fever of lust. He thinks, let me return to the monastery and inform the bhikkhus. Friends, I am obsessed by lust, oppressed by lust. I cannot maintain the spiritual life. Having disclosed my weakness in the training, I will give up the training and revert to the lower life. He returns to the monastery and informs the bhikkhus. Friends, I am obsessed by lust, oppressed by lust. I cannot maintain the spiritual life. Having disclosed my weakness in the training, I will give up the training and revert to the lower life. And his fellow monks then exhort and instruct him. Friend, the Blessed One has stated that sensual pleasures provide little gratification, much suffering and anguish, and that the danger in them is more, with the simile of the skeleton and many, many other similes. And he still gives up. This is what you must go through when you want to disrobe as a monk. Anyway, let us now come to the most important parts. First, life as a monk was optimal for progress in the Suttas. No question about it. Optimal monk settings are perfect for practice. They are designed for practice. They are designed for progress in this very life. And those circumstances have become difficult to come by today. Lay life can also work, and it is often easier to create good enough circumstances for many people around the globe. There is not much true Dhamma still around, and not many good circumstances. There is no magic about practicing as a monk. The training is the same for monastics and lay people alike. You throw away all your possessions, all your craving, all your attachments. Don't strive for perfection. Good enough is good enough. You can always reassess later and reconsider. Maybe now I do need to become a monk. But until you can no longer make progress, by all means, you can stay at home. It can still work. It is totally possible to attain the right views there. Many people did so in the past, and I'm absolutely certain that many people today did the same. Anyway, this should be enough for today. Thank you very much for listening. If you enjoy what I do, feel free to like, subscribe to the YouTube stuff, and maybe join our Dhamma Hub Discord server. But until then, I wish you a pleasant day and goodbye.